Our first speaker for this session is Amanda Sassano. Amanda Sassano is the Senior Director of Commercial Sales and Channel Sales Management at Alertus Technologies. She is responsible for the growth of Alertus throughout the commercial space and throughout the Alertus channel on a global scale. Amanda oversees a team of regional sales managers as well as business development associates to promote the Alertus solution and cultivate business globally. Amanda manages all facets of the channel sales division, including sales training and support, developing channel strategy. She prides herself on maintaining successful development and growth of the company through channel partners. Amanda is an engaging and knowledgeable speaker with extensive experience presenting on the latest information in emergency mass notification technologies and best practices. Amanda, we will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jessica, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm going to obviously speak to autonomous learning and intelligent buildings, specifically focused on how you can really streamline and automate your processes whenever there is an incident, on how you respond to that and communicate effectively and quickly throughout your organization. So let me go ahead and just getting confirmation that you can see my screen, and you can. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some historical data and facts around different types of incidents. Probably the incident that comes to everyone's mind whenever you're talking about mass notification is active assailant incident. So just wanted to kind of highlight some things. Obviously, we as a country can see that this has continually been on an uptick on the sheer number of incidents that happen throughout 2000 to 2015 is whenever this data was pulled. But ultimately, we've been on a steady incline with a slight decline in 2004 to 2005. But ultimately, what we're seeing is more of these type of incidents happening across all industries. So we typically think of education as those are typically the mass casualty incidents, but ultimately these incidents are happening across all verticals, and being able to think through and prepare yourself for if something like this or any type of emergency situation were to occur within your organization, how do you streamline and automate that process and ultimately cut down the time that it takes? So this also highlights the different industries and areas that these incidents have occurred. As you can see, obviously schools take up a big piece of that, but the majority of incidents that happen throughout our country whenever it comes to active assailant happen in the commercial sector. So typically these fall into different buckets as far as what type of incident it was, but ultimately these active shooter incidents are happening in all verticals, like I mentioned, and you can see the locations and the vertical segments represented here. And this highlights just 2018 alone. Now, this is highlighting, not just an incident that maybe happened at a business or a school, but just gun violence in general. So the main thing about this slide is whenever you are thinking about how you are going to prepare yourself, it's not so much if an incident just happens within your facility. You could have a business or a surrounding location that something could occur and impact, whether it's someone that works at your company or even just the surrounding areas. Think if you're a retail space and there's an incident that happens at, say, the location, or say it's a open shopping center. If that happens within your vicinity, well, that's not only going to impact your bottom line, you may have a surrounding effect that people, there needs to be a heightened security or this perceived notion of an unsafe environment, or that those steps to ensure safety were not taken prior to. So it's not so much that It has to happen within your walls, but ultimately, if it does happen in and around your organization, it could have a adverse impact on your business and or someone that may be maybe an employee or a guest within your facility. So when talking about the different types of violence, especially in the commercial sector, which is where the majority of active assailant incidents have taken place over the past 20 years, they typically fall under these categories. So it's not so much in a education setting that typically is a student or a parent or a staff member. Historically, it mostly has been students that have been the ones to take action in that regard. But ultimately, in the commercial sector, there are a lot of different types of incidents that can occur, whether that is employee to employee to superior, whether it's a customer to an employee, a spouse of an employee. So there's a lot of different variations as far as the types of threats your organization can encounter if you do experience a act of violence within your organization. Also, some other statistics. These are, there were over 160 active shooter incidents from the 2000 to 2013 period. The main item that I want to focus on this screen is ultimately the 60% of incidents ended before police arrived on site. And within that, that really speaks to the power and importance of automating, simplifying, and cutting down the time that it takes to inform your staff or guests if something were to happen in your facility. Because what we're finding is, these incidents are over and done before the response team is able to be on site and address the situation from a law enforcement perspective. So being a business or a school or any type of organization, being able to think through the steps and how you can really cut down your response times is key. So that's really what this session in today's presentations is really focusing on, is how do we automate that? How do we simplify that process and ensure that everyone is able to be notified very quickly and efficiently and through multiple methods if an incident were to occur. So I should have just went one more slide, but ultimately, like I said, this session and today's presentation is speaking to just that. So, a multi-step approach, studies have found that if you have 2 or more methods of communicating in the event of an incident, your effectiveness rises to over 60%. And as you add more layers and integrations and automations, that percentage of effectiveness will continue to rise. But we'll go through these next slides and kind of talk about some use cases and some options and just a way to think about the different assets that you may have already in place and what other solutions or products or just thinking through the process can help in ensuring that effectiveness. And ultimately, what are we trying to accomplish here? We're trying to cut down the loss of life and really ensure that everyone is notified as quickly as possible, as many people as possible in the most effective way. So whether that's an internal incident where you are working to notify a specific group or a command and control center as quickly as possible, and or if it is a situation that does require notifying everyone through multiple methods as quickly as possible. That's traditionally what mass notification speaks to, but ultimately at the core of what we are all trying to accomplish is an effective communication throughout, whether that's a strategic part of the organization or to the masses in the event of any type of incident that your organization has or could incur. So kind of to jump into talking about different methods that you may be utilizing today as far as communication and different infrastructure that you may have. The reality is that a lot of organizations are leveraging multiple methods or a single method to communicate throughout their organization, whether it's incident related or even just strategic communication purposes. So most organizations that we come across, they may have a public address system for overhead paging and live announcements. They may have a fire alarm system for, obviously, if there's a fire incident and effectively communicating if that happens. They may have outdoor notification if you have large spaces that you need to cover with an audible message, or personal notification. So text, email, voice call, auto dialing services, that may be a method. But typically what we're finding is that all of these are disparate systems. So even if you have one of these in place, nothing is tied together or working together to ensure an effective and streamlined and simplified process. So ultimately, being able to leverage these and looking at existing infrastructure to leverage and unify is key whenever it comes to being an effective communicator in any type of incident that your organization could incur. So ultimately, the goal is to create a single point of activation. That doesn't mean that there's, one button that's in one room, in one building. It could be multiple ways of activating, but giving you the ability to streamline that, simplify that process, take the human element out of it is key, and really creating that single point that if this incident happens, we've thought through and implemented an effective strategy and simplified that and can activate that within a single point. Integration. So like I mentioned in the slide before, you typically have something in place. Other technology that we're able to leverage can be anything from IT infrastructure like desktops and voice over IP phones to existing additional technology like shot detection or access control or camera integration. So it goes further outside of just traditional communication methods, even AED cabinets. If you have an area within the building where one of those is located, being able to know immediately if one of those is opened. So it's really thinking through your total communication and really operation strategy for your specific organization and understanding every element that could impact the day-to-day business or, even just getting notified quicker of an incident. Obviously, if an AED cabinet is open, that means that there is someone in distress, and knowing the location and when that happens and being notified immediately can extremely cut down the time that it takes to get to that person and provide them that level of care. And then ultimately filling in the gaps. So even after you assess, okay, we have this laundry list of things that we can use and can do, but we have a couple areas where we have no notification, or we just have audible notification, but it's really loud, so no one can really hear it. Let's look at some visual components that we can supplement that coverage. So really this three-pronged approach, along with evaluating existing assets that we can leverage, really makes the difference in being proactively prepared and able to respond effectively. The other piece of this is looking at all aspects of your organization, not just in technology purposes, but looking at how you address each of these layers. So internal or indoor communication, that's also referred to as facility notification, outdoor notification, personal notification, that one-to-one relationship, whether that's a phone or a computer, and then public alerting within your organization. So really looking at all of these elements can help you think through, okay, what do we have? Where are our gaps? How are we addressing this? If someone's in the parking garage, and they haven't actually entered into the building. You know, we have the indoor facilities covered with X, Y, and Z, but in the parking garage, that could be a vulnerable area, and we need to know if something is going on there, or if someone's going to enter in through the garage, but something is happening within the facility and you don't want them to enter. How do we lock down that door? How do we notify that person that they should not enter the building? So thinking about all of these things, and obviously different organizations have different challenges and variables to their environment, but that's really what we're here to help in thinking through a lot of those variables and coming up with a strategic solution that addresses your unique challenges. So these next couple slides are just other highlighting, give some visual to the overall comprehensive solution. So if you think about the different assets that you have, whether that is, you know, an existing communication asset like a public address system or personal notification, you know, how all of these things can be integrated. Ultimately, that is what is going to cut down the time and increase the effectiveness of your response time. If you think about it with something like shot detection, which I know is going to be addressed here in a few minutes, but ultimately, we're able to take information in from external systems and then have actionable information communicated throughout. So if there's, you know, a sensor that picks up that there was a shot in a specific area, well, that information can be communicated through personal phones. It can be communicated through desktop computers, or over your PA system if you wanted to leverage an audible asset. So there's a lot of, and it's not just communicating that happened, but it can communicate the location of where that happened and ensure that that location or that area within the building is avoided. So there's a lot of areas that, you know, being able to streamline that process and ensure that everything is integrated can ensure that effective communication. Another area I know I mentioned a little earlier, the fire alarm panel. So typically in any type of environment, if a fire alarm goes off, sometimes it can be purposely or non-purposely ignored. There's obviously a lot of testing that goes on within the fire alarm. There's a lot of, you know, if you're in an area where there's new construction, that typically can set off, you know, whether it's a false alarm or just testing of the system. So unfortunately, so in certain environments, we've become desensitized. So being able, we have a way to interface with that, take the information that the panel is producing on what triggered it, where it was, and other variables, and being able to communicate that out throughout the organization. So it's not just, you know, the strobe and sounders going off in my office, but I actually get a pop-up that says what it is, where it was located, and that this is a real emergency and I need to exit the building. So just thinking about different ways in which you may have something in place, but maybe it's not as effective or creating the result that you want within your organization. So also looking at the facility side, this slide highlights more of filling in the gaps, but ultimately, you know, if you have assets like shot detection or access control or cameras, these are ways that we can leverage that technology, enhance that technology so that if, you know, I'm at the front desk and I press a duress button, I want that camera to swing around and give me a pop-up of what is actually happening at the front desk. Is there someone trying to get in through the front door, or is someone getting irate? I'm able to then notify a specific group of people that, hey, assistance is needed. There is a situation. You can have someone review that and confirm that there is something going on. But ultimately, it's giving, really automating the communication and the response based on what incident is being initiated and from where. This is a continuation of that. So like I mentioned before, whether it's IT infrastructure, the different environments, whether that's commercial, healthcare, education, military, each vertical has its individual challenges, and we're able to really assess and leverage what you all have and unify and enhance that communication process. And then also from more of an IT-centric alerting perspective, it could be something where, if in a manufacturing environment, they have a system that is giving them instructions on how to build a specific component, they may have a duress button tied to that. And if that duress button is pressed, it's actually going to shut down the equipment and notify the security team or command and control. So it goes a lot further even throughout your just everyday business process and vulnerabilities that you have within your unique environments, and how we can streamline that communication to just increase the effectiveness and the timeliness of getting that communication to the right people. And then also large area. So within this, whether it's a location that has high traffic or a lot of visitors, or a lot of people that may not be subscribed through, say, a personal alerting platform, all of these verticals that are reflected here have challenges in different variables within their day-to-day that present challenges in effectively communicating throughout an incident. So these are just highlighting a few that really looking at the process, streamlining that, and ensuring that whatever variables are within your environment are thought through as far as how can we communicate the most effectively, and timeliness is key. Whether it's, we need to shut down this piece of equipment, or we need to notify the front office that something is occurring and we need assistance. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this full-fledged activation. It definitely can be, but ultimately it at the core is strategic communication. And then, like I mentioned, so no matter what you are leveraging, no matter what solutions, cutting it down to a single point of activation, whether that's a physical button, whether that's a software activation, whether that's automating communication through, say, a shot detection system, or if something, someone tries to badge in somewhere through access control and their badge is flagged, notifying or locking down that area simultaneously as notifying command and control. So these are all different elements that ultimately, thinking through the process and cutting it down to a single point of activation is really what is going to automate that response. And like I mentioned, it doesn't have to be a physical button. It could be an integration that is triggering off a response to that specific type of incident. And then, so for automation, you obviously have to have a very flexible platform. So whether that is, different integration capabilities, whether that's, different forms of communication, PoE to Wi-Fi to wireless, to external sources. So being able to assess on what the outcome needs to be and what that integration capability needs to look like. You need a flexible platform to be able to facilitate that, accomplishing that single point. So that kind of wraps up my portion. I believe Vinny or Jessica, if you want to introduce our next speaker.